The Florida Gators basketball roster is taking shape for 2025.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free every single podcast and on YouTube. Happy Wednesday. I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find out my written work with New York Giants on SI. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And we talked a bit about Florida Gators basketball yesterday. We talked a lot about Florida Gators basketball yesterday with Neil Blackman from Florida Basketball Hour podcast. And we talked about, the starting five, who's coming back, who might come back, who might join this team. And I do feel like we've gotten to a point where this is a Florida Gators basketball team that is replacing a lot, right? I mean, Walter Clayton Jr. is gone, Alijah Martin's gone, Will Richards gone, Denzel Aberdeen's gone, Sam Alexis is gone, who for much of the year was a rotational player, and then Micah Hanlogton came back, and then Sam Alexis wasn't a rotational player. Ruben Chinyelu has declared for the NBA draft, although we expect him back. Alex Condon has declared for the NBA draft, although we expect him back. I will say there's the possibility that it doesn't happen, but I do expect them both back. But that means right now, the Florida Gators have one hole in their starting five, right? You've got your point guard in Xavier Lee. You've got your small forward in Thomas Haugh. You've got your power forward in Alex Condon. You've got your center in Ruben Chinyelu. You don't know who your shooting guard is yet. And I will say, the Thomas Haugh thing, interesting. I'm just going to be very interested to see him play small forward full time. Again, I don't. It's not a thing that I necessarily disagree with. It's just, I view him as better as a four, to be honest. I do think that in modern NBA, like, he's big enough to play that, and he might play that at the next level. He might be a small forward here, power forward there. We see it all the time, right? Like we see Kyle Anderson with UCLA a decade or so ago was a point guard for UCLA, and then now he's a forward for or in the NBA his entire career. But I do think that it's interesting. I think that Thomas Haugh is going to play like the biggest small forward ever. But I also think that Florida should absolutely dominate on the glass next year. And I know that they dominated this year, right? Like, Florida did a hell of a job going, hey, we don't care who we're playing. We're going to out-rebound them. They did a great job. I think they're going to do it even more. Like, they had a 38.5% offensive rebound percentage this year. Highest in the country was 41.4%. Wouldn't shock me if Florida got up to, 40%, maybe higher, depending on how Thomas Haugh plays. And by that, I mean, not, is he playing well or not? I have no doubt that he's going to play well. But is he playing like the Thomas Haugh we saw this year that's going to be hammering the boards? If so, yeah, Florida's going to be up at around 40%. Is he trying to run in transition more? Then maybe not. And I will say this as well, moving on from the Thomas Haugh part, which Todd Golden has confirmed. Like, he said it before, he's saying it again, that he's still saying Thomas Haugh is going to be starting at the three, which does give me some pretty good faith that Alex Condon and Ruben Chinyelu will be back, right? Because if either one of them isn't back, Thomas Haugh could be starting at the four, right? Like, if Chinyelu doesn't come back, Condon can move to center, Haugh can come to power forward. If Condon doesn't come back, Chinyelu can stay at center, and Haugh can move to power forward. So him saying, yeah, he's going to start at the three is pretty interesting, and does give me some confidence that we will be seeing Thomas Haugh, Alex Condon, and Ruben Chinyelu as that 3 through 5 there. But also, in the portal, Florida added A.J. Brown out of Ohio. I've said before, like, I think he's a fringe start bench guy. Like I've said, depending on who you bring in, maybe he's on the bench, maybe he's a starter, however it may go. But from people in the know that I've spoken to, both on air, like Neil Blackman said this yesterday. So spoken to both on air and off air people that I've spoken to, they are expecting AJ Brown to be a bench player that isn't the sixth man. Sorry. One person, maybe a second person, told me that they don't view him as a sixth man either, which is fine. I don't think that's necessarily damning or anything like that. I am very interested to see who's going to be that off the bench ball handler, that off the bench primary ball handler when Xavier Lee is not on the court. But there's people that I've spoken to that said AJ Brown, they don't expect him to be a sixth man. Maybe Irvin Klavjar is I don't know. I'm not sold on Irvin Klavjar being a sound enough defender to start. But if he's the primary ball handler off the bench, maybe. I'm not totally opposed to that. He just seemed like at certain points he just got lost, and toward the end of the year he really just. I don't really know what happened if it was a confidence thing or what, but he just played horrible toward the end of the year and fell out of the rotation completely. So I'll say that. But AJ Brown, I mean, on the bench, elite shooter, right? And so I do think that with Florida, like there's a decent chance you see more bench points this year than you saw last year. Which, I mean, I'm not going to complain about that. Are you? No, didn't think so. I will say that one thing that just looking at this lineup that is not yet complete, one of the things that does concern me, and I think it's a valid reason to be concerned with, is spacing. We talked about this a little bit yesterday with Neil, where you have Xavier Lee, who good shooter, right? Like good scorer, good bucket getter, good shooter. Not his primary focus when he's playing, but it's something he can do. Thomas Haugh, who I do think people are, I don't know, like he shot 34% from three this year. He shot, I think it was 32% going into the NCAA tournament. And I think a lot of people look at him as like a bad shooter, and I don't think that's true. I just don't. I don't think 34% is horrible, especially for someone who the year prior shot 25%. I feel like that's a pretty big increase with an increased sample size as well. So I feel like that adds to it. But I also feel like not enough people are acknowledging, hey, you can develop your jump shot more, right? Like there's really not a ton that Thomas Haugh needs to work on, right? I don't think that many of us are looking at him and saying, yeah, you really need to work on, becoming a secondary ball handler. Because I don't think anybody here wants him to be that. So I think that looking at his jump shot and saying, hey, that's the thing you need to work on. Okay. Alex Condon, not a great 3-point shooter. Not awful, but not great. He's another one who improved his percentage somewhat significantly, even from 29 to 32% or 33%. So Alex Condon's another one who another year of development with that jump shot could change. I understand where there are concerns, right? Because if they don't take those developmental steps and you've got a 33% shooter, a 34% shooter, and then Ruben Chinyelu, who didn't even attempt a three and can't shoot threes, can't even shoot from the free throw line, I think there's valid concern there. I do think that's Chin's next step. People keep talking about, oh, he needs to, I see like on the timeline, like, oh yeah, Ruben Chinyelu needs to develop a 3-point. No, he doesn't. I don't think that Ruben Chinyelu needs to develop a 3-point shot. I do think that he can develop a free throw jumper, and that could be enough. I think that if Ruben Chinyelu develops a free throw jumper, and you start forcing centers to come up to him, if he's at the free throw line or top key, you could get that backdoor cut there. And he's a serviceable passer for he's not Chinyelu. I mean, he's not a Condon level passer, but he's a serviceable passer. We are going to talk about Desmond Claude next because Florida Gators visit coming up on Locked On Gators. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all of my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's pretty easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments. There we go. And spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thanks for your Locked On Gators, your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free for listening to the podcast and on YouTube. And another player that we spoke about a bit yesterday, we're going to speak a little bit more about today. And we spoke about him last week, I believe it was. Might have been 2 weeks ago. It's just, look, I'm going to be honest with you. The past 45 days with March Madness, the NFL draft, and everything, it's just a blur. Right. It's just, I don't know if we spoke about him last week or the week before, but we spoke about Desmond Claude before. And Desmond Claude, 6'6", 205-pound guard. That's not much of a shooter, right? He shot 30% from three last year. Not awesome. Not an ideal clip that you want to have someone joining this lineup where I just mentioned, spacing might be an issue. And many people have acknowledged, hey, spacing might be an issue. 30% shooter or 31% shooter. Not exactly what you want to add in, but again, I do think that it's worth acknowledging that, like Neil Blackman mentioned yesterday, Eric Musselman's system probably didn't help him. Neil even mentioned, we've seen a lot of guys leave Musselman's system, whether that's through the portal or to go pursue, to go pursue professional basketball. At NBA otherwise, and become considerably better, right? Become better scorers, better shooters, all that. And part of it is the system just not putting them in position to succeed. So maybe that was part of it. Maybe he's just not a good three-point shooter. It could be either one, right? But with Desmond Claude, I do think that it's worth acknowledging that he gets to the line so damn often. Okay. We've talked about, free throw rate before, which I'll pull up Florida's numbers just for comparison purposes. But Florida, as individuals, you had a free throw rate for Walter Clayton Jr. of 27.5, a free throw rate for Alijah Martin of 28, Alex Condon 61.7. You had Thomas Haugh 64.8. Those are the higher percentages. There's a bunch of people in the mid-low 20s and all that. But at guard, Walter Clayton Jr., 27.5, Alijah Martin, 28%. That was their free throw rate. So we could talk about Haugh and Condon, but a lot of that came from them just doing gritty work down low. And Condon, being a bad free throw shooter, teams are fine sending him to the line. And Denzel Aberdeen, 28%, who, of course, he's no longer here. Ruben Chinilu, 32%. Micah Hanlockton, 37.9%. Guys that, one, aren't big-time scorers. Like, they're not taking a lot of shots like Chinilu and Hanlockton. And two, they're not good free throw shooters. So teams are fine being physical with them and sending them to the line. And remember, Florida's guards, 27.5%, 28%. Will Richard, 25.3%. Denzel Aberdeen, 28%. Urban Klopshar, 15% free throw rate. Right? So about a quarter of their shots. Desmond Claude with USC, because he was with Xavier before that. That's why I'm specifying with USC. Free throw rate of 52%. That's a lot, first off. Second off, that's tremendous for the team that we're talking about, right? We've mentioned, Xavier Lee could probably play off ball more than he did at Princeton, but he had to be ball dominant and create for other people. Thomas Haugh, I think, again, could develop his jumper. I think Alex Condon could also take another step. I'm not saying they're going to become, 45% free throw shooters from three. But when I think about things, like let's say Desmond Claude does become a Florida Gator. I can view a lineup where it's Xavier Lee, Desmond Claude, A.J. Brown, Thomas Haugh, and Alex Condon. Your worst shooters out there or your worst shooter is Desmond Claude with a 31% 3-point percentage. Everybody else considerably higher at that point. And if Condon and Hauk both take that step as shooters, let's say they're shooting Hauk's at 36.5% and Condon's at 34%, right? Marginal increases. But when you've got a guy like Desmond Claude who can get to the line consistently, can get under the basket consistently, that drive and dish is going to be wide open. And even if there's rotations, like everybody else in that lineup can pass out of it. I do think that would be a lethal 5-out offense, which I do think we could see a bit of next year. And I've said this before. I don't think that being with USC, like Neil can mention Eric Musselman's system, right? I will mention that USC really only had, 2 good shooters last year. I do think that throws a wrench into some possibilities for spacing and just creating shots for Desmond Claude. And I do think that, that there was room for growth there, obviously, of course, with his offensive game itself. But also if he was surrounded by better talent, maybe there's a different conversation there. Desmond Claude is set to arrive in Gainesville tonight and begin a visit tomorrow. I will say I'm not expecting a commitment or anything. As Neil mentioned yesterday, we didn't really follow up with this because we were trying to talk about actual things that were happening with the team and not hypotheticals. But Neil mentioned yesterday that there's a possibility that Desmond Claude isn't a take for Florida right now, which we talk about with football all the time about whether someone's a take or not. But there's a possibility that Desmond Claude isn't a take right now for Florida. And that Florida can say, hey, we're going to wait and see about your commitment. Like, that's a real possibility there. And so, and the reasoning for that would be that Florida might be waiting on some guys who are going through the NBA draft process right now. And if they withdraw from the NBA draft process, then Florida's going to look at them and say, hey, come on to Gainesville, which we didn't talk about this yesterday either, but Desmond Claude also going through that NBA draft process. He's in the portal. He's going through the NBA draft process. There's a chance that he goes pro, although from people I've spoken to, we really don't expect that to happen. Part of that is not having that jumper, people aren't, and not being an elite ball handler, facilitator of the offense. A lot of people are not going, or a lot of teams are not going to be looking at you as someone that they can say, hey, come be the guy here. And if you're not going to be the guy and you're not an elite shooter, you should probably come back to college. And I think that's an important part for Desmond Claude. So Florida might be waiting on NBA draft guys' decisions, but Desmond Claude is also waiting on that. So this one could drag out a bit. Late May could be the time we get an answer. Desmond Claude is also being recruited by Gonzaga, Ole Miss, Virginia. And I would expect that other schools are going to get involved here, right? Other schools are going to miss out on players. Other schools are going to want to go and decide to upgrade and say, hey, you know what? He hasn't committed yet. Let's take a swing. Or, hey, we were targeting other people in the NBA draft. They decided to stick with that NBA draft route, and now we're looking for a guard. And so Desmond Claude things could change, right? With who's recruiting him, who's in contact with him, who's pursuing him. Things could change, but right now he's set to visit Florida. I don't know. Maybe there's going to be a point where he's like, yeah, if I come back, I'm going to be at Florida. But if not, then I'm not. That could be a possibility there. We're going to wrap up with a football conversation. I don't know why I said conversation, but we're going to wrap up with football today on Locked On Gators. To wrap up today's episode of Locked On Gators, we are talking about Dillon Tatum, who visited Florida yesterday, and as On3 reported that Florida and Dillon Tatum would not be continuing these talks about potentially adding him to the roster, and that it's centered basically around NIL, that Dillon Tatum wanted more than Florida was willing to offer. And I know that there's going to be people who then say, all right, well, give the kids what they want, right? Like, don't get outbid. And I can sit here and say, well, it's not our money, right? I could sit here and say, well, they only have X amount of money to spend here. But I do think that it's also important to just acknowledge that while we're getting closer to a professional football front office style and a professional football roster management style, it is important to acknowledge, especially with revenue sharing coming in this summer, that it is more important than ever to not overpay kids. And look, revenue sharing, I'm sure other schools are going to do it different ways. So maybe some schools will be like, hey, we're going to do 1-year deals every time. And a lot, I don't know what the specifics are going to be about that. I would imagine Florida would be one of those 1 year at a time deal schools. Because that's probably how it should be done, because I'd imagine it can get pretty messy if a kid transfers. But that's neither here nor there. It is more important than ever for schools to be able to navigate essentially a salary cap, right? Because right now it's basically like professional baseball, right? There's no true salary cap for every team, but every team has their own budget, and that budget will decide how much that they spend on NIL. Football is, or it's now going to be like professional football, like the NFL, with a twist. Actually, we'll compare it to the NBA, because the NBA has like the luxury tax and all that. So we'll compare it to the NBA, where every team is going to have this salary cap. It's going to be low 20 millions, and it's going to be that every team can spend that. Obviously, not every team will spend that. Not every team makes that to spend in athletics. So not expected there, but for Florida and other schools where they will be able to spend that kind of money, not saying that they will, but that they'll be able to spend that kind of money. They will also still have NIL collectives, at least for the time being. That's another thing that legislation's going through, and just, I don't get me started on just how NIL is being handled. But we're getting closer to an NBA style where everybody has a salary cap, but some teams are smarter with managing it than others, and some teams are willing to spend more and go into the luxury bracket, go into that luxury tax bracket, and deal with that. And for Florida players and Florida recruits, I realize this is a long tangent, but we always talk about Florida is, not willing to pay the player that much, right? And I do think we've gotten to a point where maybe it's either Florida's not willing to pay that much for whatever reason, but also maybe Florida's being too stingy with some things. Like it might be time to adapt or die, because we saw Florida bring in multiple guys throughout the 2 portal windows so far, and leave. And a lot of the times it's been reported as, hey, NIL is a factor. And I understand that you don't want to overpay for anybody, but at a certain point, if you want to land these names, then you have to pay. I like the Dillon Tatum. Okay. I had every intention of talking today about Dillon Tatum, saying that I like him partially because of his versatility. He's someone that at Michigan State played everywhere, got hurt at the beginning of the 2024 season, missed the rest of the season. And when I was first told that things weren't going as planned with this, and that, they weren't going to continue this, part of me honestly thought maybe injury had something to do with it, but it's an NIL thing, which maybe the injury goes in, or I would imagine that the injury goes into how Florida is valuing Dillon Tatum. I would have taken him. I don't think he's someone that you needed to invest in heavily. And I do think that with some things with Florida, like many Florida Gators fans, am on the side of I want Florida to spend more money, but also I don't want Florida to overpay. Like the reported number for Carson Beck is $4 million, something like that. He's not worth that. Like that's NFL rookie contract premium pick quarterback money. He's not worth that. He doesn't play like that. So I wouldn't want Florida to pay that, but I also would be annoyed if I heard, hey, Florida is not willing to be competitive about this player or about this price point, and then the player goes on and succeeds. So I do think that we're at a weird time right now where, again, myself, like many Florida Gators fans, want Florida to spend money, want Florida to go get the players you need to get, but also we don't want players to get overpaid by Florida. All right, if you're going to get overpaid, go ahead, because I hope you make as much money as you possibly can while playing this. I just hope you're not getting overpaid at Florida. And I think that we've reached a point where it seems like too often kids are leaving Florida. This isn't the rant I intended on going on when I started this, but this is what we're doing now. I think we've reached a point now where far too often kids leave campus or Florida stops communicating with people or whatever it may be. It happens too often now where it's, oh, they wanted more money than Florida was willing to pay, where I do think, or at least it's happened often enough, maybe not too often, but it's happened often enough where I do think that you can genuinely raise the question of, is Florida just misvaluing players right now? Like, is that what it is? We see kids leave Florida all the time, enter the portal from Florida, partially because other schools are recruiting them. We saw it with DeAndre Robinson. We saw it with Jack Pyburn. We saw it with TJ Searcy. We've seen it with quite a few guys, Gregory Smith III. We've seen it with quite a few guys where they leave because other schools are offering more and tampering, and you can like it, you can not like it. As long as it's a thing, I'm going to be honest, I wish Florida was doing it more. I'm just going to be honest about it. As long as schools are doing it, I wish Florida were doing it more. But I feel like it happens too often where kids leave Florida because other schools are offering NIL, and kids visit Florida and then they leave, and it's like, oh, well, NIL was a thing. I think it's happening often enough where you could say maybe Florida is not valuing the players right now, like properly, completely. I do think it's worth the question. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. You don't know the answer. I don't think anybody knows the answer. I don't think Florida knows the answer. I don't think the players know the answer. But it does seem like it's happening often enough, and it happens a lot with Florida specifically, where it's worth posing that question about if Florida's undervaluing these kids right now, and how to correct that. And hopefully with this NFL-style front office, they'll be able to do that. But it does get a bit frustrating when there's a bunch of kids that come in to visit and not kids that you're landing. And we keep hearing NIL is part of it. It's frustrating as a fan. That's just, I don't know what value you wanted from that, but that's the rant that I ended up going on. That's the tangent. And that's where we're going to end it. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever listen to podcast and on YouTube. We will be back tomorrow. Talk more Florida Gators for Locked On Gators and Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI, and we'll see you all next time.